value from success, growth in discovery. Golden Arrow Resources is a well-funded gold-copper exploration company with proven management and prospective properties in Chile, Argentina, and Paraguay. Golden Arrow trades on the Toronto Venture Exchange, symbol GRG, on Frankfurt, symbol G6A, and the OTCQB, symbol GARWF. For more information, visit us at goldenarrowresources.com or call Sean at 778-686-0135.
Welcome to the Goddard Report. Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, her website, taxpayer.com. Welcome back to the show, Kris.
Thank you so much.
Kris, an exciting day at Vancouver City Hall where they have an interesting proposal. One which I said, what are they going to do? Put up a sign outside of Vancouver that says, don't come here ever?
Yeah, they might as well, because right now, Vancouver City staff, the same Vancouver City staff that wrote a report saying we should cancel free parking for veterans, and the same city staff that voted themselves a 4.5% pay increase for their managers in the middle of the pandemic, have now come up with a 371-page report on something that includes what they call transport pricing. Now, that might ring a bell. Back when we were first talking about this at the TransLink level at Metro Vancouver, it was called mobility pricing. And then when TransLink put out their study on it, they called it congestion fees. And now they're calling it transport pricing. Basically what this is driving taxes. They want to hike up driving taxes. And this is something that bureaucrats typically do when something is super unpopular and or expensive. They'll slap a new euphemism on it, because they know people don't like it, so they keep shifting it around in their little Orwellian form of newspeak, and now they're calling it transport prices. So to be clear, they want to make it more expensive for you to drive your car on roads in Vancouver, so we're going to call it driving taxes, for clarity's sake.
Well, I remember TransLink called it a driving levy.
Levy.
Levy, and when George Poole was the chair of the TransLink board on my television show Pacific Report, I asked him, why are you calling it a levy? Because that means, like the transportation levy hydro charge, that means there will be PST and GST on it. Whereas if you call it a tax, most likely the government won't put a tax on another tax. He refused to.
Elaborate or explain why?
Yeah, so just
exactly.
call a tax, folks.
Of course. Let's just call it what it is. This is a tax, and they want to hike them up. And I encourage anybody, I know 370-something pages is a long time to read, and it's mostly full of kind of urban planning jargon. But I really encourage anybody to go and read that, because it'll definitely affect you, whether you drive a car or not, because they're even coming after natural gas furnaces in Vancouver.
Natural gas, one of the resources BC has in abundance. This was 10 years ago. I saw a report that said BC had a proven 200-year reserve of natural gas. And before we brought in natural gas homes here, I remember how smoggy Vancouver used to be back in the early 80s.
Yes, me too. Actually, it's
so
funny
why
you
did
that.
natural gas all of a sudden become an evil thing?
Because taking off my CTF hat here for a second and just putting on my I've lived in British Columbia and across Canada my whole life and I've been a journalist most of my life hat, it seems that some extremists don't like the fact that human beings have an impact on the environment at all. And I say this as someone who, I rode my bike for more than a decade in Ottawa. You know, I hand sewed the cloth diapers for my baby. I am a small E environmentalist. I recycle. I buy used items and used clothing all the time. I get it. Okay? I do not litter. I have yelled at strangers for littering. I have personally gone and cleaned up creek beds. I am a small E environmentalist. But there are some folks who seem to just not accept the fact that human beings are on this earth, we have a right to exist, and that we will have an impact on our environment. And so they're going after something as abundant and clean-burning and effective as natural gas now, which is kind of mind-boggling to those of us who can grow up and remember the commercials coming from the government about embracing the clean burning blue flame, encouraging people to switch over from more heavier heating oil to natural gas appliances and furnaces. And now here we are, we have some folks, and they are the extreme fringe, who are going after natural gas. Unfortunately, these folks get into bureaucracies, including the City of Vancouver bureaucracy, and they're going after folks with natural gas now.
Take a look at how much it costs to heat using electricity versus natural gas. When I moved from Saskatchewan, which is a really cold place, 9 months of the year, we had natural gas heat, and I was paying about $60. I came to Vancouver and left my electric heat on all day, and I had a $360 monthly bill. That's the kind of hike you're going to be looking at if you can't use natural gas to heat your house.
Absolutely. It's not comparable. I lived in Ontario for many years, and luckily we had natural gas heat, or I frankly don't know what we would have done, because we were living there at the time when the provincial Liberal government nearly destroyed Ontario's hydro system with this ridiculous so-called green scheme, which wasn't green at all. And they made people's hydro bills, ours was close to $400 a month, not including heat. That was for light bulbs and like midnight laundry. It went crazy in Ontario. And I was producing talk radio at the time. Jim, we had callers, it made you cry. We had callers lined up who had walled themselves into one room in their home, elderly people who were actually using oil lamps, if you can believe it, who were choosing between eating and heating. They had record lineups for their food banks. That was a serious crisis in Ontario. And so we need to be very careful before we start dictating to people what they can use to heat their homes and to power their appliances. More options is always better. And so that's where, we got to be careful when we've got city governments and city bureaucrats deciding that your average run-of-the-mill natural gas furnace is now verboten.
So, is the city willing to subsidize people in any way if they go all electric? And by the way, where's this electricity going to be generated now that we have reports maybe the Site C dam isn't seismically safe?
Great question. And what's interesting is, we were pretty neutral on the Site C dam because it's a lot of money. And then, of course, we were already billions into it. I think it was $2.7 billion by the time they were really making a decision on it. So there's a lot of sunk costs there. And frankly, what was weird is a lot of the folks who are anti-oil and gas, they're always telling you to use an electric car or switch to heat pumps. For some reason, they were often the same people who were anti-Site C dam, which is a real head-scratcher because it makes you wonder where they think we're going to have to get the extra electrical power from. As BC Hydro's commercial used to say, it doesn't come from a hole in the wall. It comes from mega projects like hydroelectric dams. And so that's a really good question. We've got some serious decisions to make over the next 5 to 10 years here in BC about where we want to get our energy from. And when it comes to driving in Vancouver, they need to be more upfront, city staff need to be more upfront with how much they want to start charging people tolls to use the roads. This is 370-something pages, and you need to look through it with a magnifying glass to try to intuit what they want to pay. From what I've been able to tell, they're ranging between tens of millions, quote, and I think I saw one stat of $170 million per year, and this is what they're guesstimating they're going to be taking from drivers. For the implementation side, this is just for the infrastructure, I guess, with metering and tolling and all that stuff, they're thinking it's going to cost $500 million just on the government side. And government, of course, gets their money from taxpayers. So they got to take a serious look at this. We hope that City Council stands up to staff and says no.
Does the City of Vancouver, or at least the elected politicians, know just how unpopular the tolls were on BC's bridges and how people celebrated when they were removed? Because a friend of mine who lives in Langley said for his wife to work in Coquitlam, it was going to cost them thousands of dollars a year. She was ready to quit her job.
Yeah, for sure. And they should take a page from that. A lot of things sound great in theory. So if you've got your master's degree in urban planning and you really love playing SimCity and you really are into the urban core, politics, that sort of stuff, those things sound awesome and they're fun to do. But you need to apply them to practical reality and everyday working people. And everyday working people usually use their cars. And they most always use their cars to get to and from work. That's just how the cookie crumbles. That's how they function. And the NDP wisely got rid of those bridge tolls. And look at what happened. They got elected to government. And this is why Premier John Horgan was running away from this issue so quickly during this most recent provincial election when the issue of so-called road fees or taxes or tolls came up, because they're unpopular. And they're unpopular because they're unaffordable. To give you an indication, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation attended the meetings for the TransLink mobility pricing concept meetings. And when they came out with their study, their full report that was led by Joy McPhail, former NDP cabinet minister, we did the math. The chart was right there showing how much they wanted to charge people to cross bridges. So the minimum, and I'm not kidding, Jim, they called it the min plus. They didn't even say maximum. Between the minimum and min plus, if you're a 2-car commuter family living in Langley or Surrey, and you're using the Port Mann and the Alex Fraser, that would cost you between $4,000 and $6,000 every year, just for the tolls. That, of course, does not touch your carbon tax, your gas taxes, ICBC, all that other stuff. $4,000 and $6,000.
So when is Vancouver City Hall going to start ripping down the high-rises in the city and just turn it into one big park for the homeless?
This is the thing, is that I think sometimes people lose track of the fact that people live there, like actual people live there. And further, if you look at this report, it isn't just a war on the car where drivers are going to get nuked, and it's exactly that. It's not just a war on the car that uses oil and gas. They're going after cars, period. So, for example, they want to take the requirement where you have to have a minimum amount of parking availability when you build a new building. So if you're building a condo tower or mixed use, you have to have a certain number of parking spaces that you build underneath your building. That seems like a no-brainer, so people can get to where they need to go. This report is actually saying they should flip it on its head and put a maximum there. Let's put a maximum amount of parking spaces that you can possibly build and make it a regulation. And in fact, let's eventually get to 0 parking spots. So folks can say this is not a war on the car. They're wrong. This is absolutely an ideological battleground going on right now between some folks at Vancouver City staff and the rest of us who use our vehicles to get to work and live our day-to-day lives.
When I was 21 years old, I didn't mind riding my bike to work even in horrible weather conditions. I rode my bike to work in Peace River, Alberta, which is 500 k's north of Edmonton. It gets a little chilly there. In Regina, in Moose Jaw, in Winnipeg. In Vancouver, I stopped riding my bike not because I wasn't fit, but because it wasn't safe to ride my bike on the roads, and they've built bike paths. But studies have shown when you have bike traffic separated from other traffic, they run down pedestrians, and they're kind of dangerous on their own. Plus, I am collecting a pension now. I'm not exactly Mr. Cycle anymore. Does Vancouver fail to recognize we have an aging population?
This is one of the things that I find, personally speaking, kind of sad about this whole debate. For the record, I was a cyclist in Ottawa for years during winter. It gets to minus 30-something, minus 35 with the wind chill. I literally used a balaclava and a ski mask and ski gloves, like the whole bit. I did my grocery shopping, the whole thing. Not everybody can do that, and I accept that. So while I, wore my bike helmet into work and had the lights hanging off of my backpack, that was fine for me at the time. That's what worked for me at the time. But not everybody can do that. And I think folks need to recognize that, both cyclists and drivers alike. We can make cycling a viable option for people to commute in Metro Vancouver. We can make it safe for pedestrians, cyclists, and drivers. But there's no need to attack drivers for the sin, quote-unquote, of driving a car. And this is what this sounds like. And what's really disturbing, again, is that this could cost people thousands of dollars a year as drivers, but the staff isn't being upfront about it. It's 370-something pages of planning, but it's very, very hard to figure out what they're actually planning on charging you to drive down one of their streets.
With the pandemic, major office buildings now are virtually empty, and big business is finding out it's cheaper to have their employees work from home because then they don't have to pay for rents or leases or city taxes. Does Vancouver have a plan to help relieve those businesses or landlords who own those towers if there weren't any cars driving in?
Now, just imagine if they start dinging people for driving in at all, right? Good question. I was reading through this report on Monday night, and I'm still not through it because it's so dense. There was a tiny little paragraph saying that, COVID has kind of changed the way people work and, where we go to work and how we commute, but nonetheless, we still need to do this. They need to do a big rethink on that. As you point out, a lot of people are changing the way they work. A lot of people are working from home. A lot of corporations like that their people are working from home, and they're making it happen. So this idea of trying to tax people to death for driving into the city core might not be the best way to try to fund their projects. They're going to have to do another rethink on this.
How much money a year do the people who make these suggestions make?
The city manager, last I checked, makes $350,000 a year. And the last one I saw there for urban planning, I think it was around $275,000 plus around like $8,000 in expenses. I'm actually putting in some Freedom of Information requests to find out if any of the folks who helped write this project and this plan have car allowances. I'm kind of curious.
So if the average working couple in Vancouver makes $120,000 together, and that's a well-paid family, but if you're working a minimum wage job, how do you pay these fees?
This is the thing. The median family income in British Columbia itself is around $80,000. So that's the average median family income of working people. And you're right, lots of families make $120,000 in Vancouver, and with the living expenses, they're not rich. And then we have decision makers who are unelected, who are getting paid $350,000, who are coming up with these ideas. Unfortunately, there seems to be a big disconnect between the people paying the bills and the people coming up with these ideas. And again, we encourage the folks who actually face the electorate, the voters, the elected council people who sit on Vancouver City Council at Vancouver City Hall, they need to stand up to staff. They need to say, you know what, we're the ones that face the voters, we're the ones that are connected to the real people out there. Thanks for your suggestion, but we're going to put this on the shelf. And
Vancouver also acts like it's a seashore village where, it's 10 blocks by 10 blocks, everybody can walk or bike. It's a major workspace hub where there used to be a time 600,000 people a day drove into Vancouver to work. They obviously don't want those people.
This is the thing that makes me personally scratch my head. Vancouver and the surrounding area is a teeming port city. And at one time, and we hope this is still the case, it was full of visionary business leaders, entrepreneurs, risk takers, go-getters, all that stuff. There's been cargo and freight traffic and rail traffic and truck traffic, and it's coming and going. This is how Vancouver in its modern form was founded. It was a boom city on the coast. It is a port city. This is not like a concept village built in the Kootenays. It's not. And so if folks want to live that way and rollerblade to a fruit stand once a day to get their food, that's awesome. Honestly, that's a nice way to live if you can do that.
How does that fruit get to the fruit stand
Exactly.
if they can't bring it in a truck?
They bring it in a truck. And after it was harvested using machines and people, probably in the Fraser Valley of the Okanagan, using tractors and combines and all that other great stuff. And then it was also grown in a greenhouse using natural gas. We cannot get away from industry. We need to embrace it and use it as safely and cleanly as possible. And this is where I'm pleading with folks on the so-called other side of the aisle who seem to think that everybody can be a cyclist or a walkable commuter, to understand that not everybody can, and that it's not fair to try to hit people with these massive driving taxes.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications, patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Avon Resources Limited is a gold exploration company. with significant projects in British Columbia and the Yukon. Trading on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol ABN, and the OTCQB, symbol ABNAF. Surrounded by world-class gold deposits and mines, Avon's 23,000 hectares Forest Kerr Gold Project is located in the heart of the Golden Triangle in northwestern BC. For more information, visit us at avonresources.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, members of Parliament have voted for the minority Trudeau government to reveal details behind the spending on the pandemic. The government complains, that'll reveal business secrets and make us uncompetitive when it comes to acquiring vaccines and PPE and so on. Do you buy that excuse, or should we have an open look at the books, except when it should be top secret?
Not for 1 second do we believe it. There are common sense and obvious ways of protecting sensitive information, such as blacking out the names of a corporation if it's really sensitive. We understand that. Nobody wants to put public safety at risk. Let's not be silly. But it really does seem like they doth protest too much. They're definitely trying to cover things up, and they shouldn't. People deserve to know what has happened with their money, and especially what has happened with their public safety planning and their public health planning. I need to stress, this isn't just about the elected politicians. In many cases, there were department workers and bureaucrats in Ottawa whose job it was to keep a stockpile of things like gowns, masks, gloves, the personal protective equipment, the PPE. And we've been hearing some stories at committee that makes your hair curl. Things like they just let all of this stuff expire, and then they dumped it in a landfill, and then they did not replace it. You know, some of these folks, getting back to it, these folks are paid something like $200,000, $250,000, gold-plated pensions you can only dream of, where it's literally their job. They're public health and public safety combined. It's their job to keep masks and gloves on hand for when a pandemic hits. This is not new. And it looks, unfortunately, like we were caught with our pants down. And so we do need to know who, when, where, what, and why. We need to know this stuff.
Remember when the Trudeau government said because of the pandemic, we shouldn't have to have any of our spending plans for the next several years examined?
This is nonsense. And it would be nonsense if any party did this. If the Conservatives were in power or the NDP were in power or some Green coalition, we would demand the same amount of accountability and transparency from them. And what's disturbing is that we actually now have the highest spending in the International Monetary Fund. They came out with a study just a few days ago, and our deficit ratio, I didn't know this, our deficit ratio is bigger than in the United States even. Like not the amount, but the ratio. So our spending is more freewheeling and open-ended than theirs is, and way more than most European nations. So, whoa, guys, we haven't even had a budget since March of 2019. A budget, a federal budget. So the adults in the room in Ottawa, from the finance department on down, need to get it together, and they need to come together and put out a budget. Because we know it's going to be bad news. It's going to be awful, but we at least need a plan. An okay plan or even a bad plan is better than no plan at all. We need a serious look at the books, a really hard look at the data, and we need to be able to map our way forward, because right now we're just flying in the dark and blowing money out of the back of the plane.
We'll have more with Kris Sims right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Kris Sims. Kris, the federal government has proposed a plan to attack homelessness by having the CMHC, the Canadian Mortgage and Housing Corporation, place a tax on new home buyers to pay for this plan at a time when the government says it's trying to make homes more affordable. Is this a good idea?
It's one of those weird things, eh? Like it's like trying to pull your own, what is it? Trying to pull yourself up by holding onto the bucket. Why would making a first-time home buyer purchase more expensive help first-time home buyers? It's rather mind-boggling. What we would like to see is a reduced taxation on home building and on development so that it is less costly to build housing. And so the cost of housing goes down and the supply goes up. Because if there's more of them to buy, hopefully the price will come down. But unfortunately, we seem to be stuck in this cycle of ever-increasing regulation and taxation and fees, and the housing costs are just going up and up and up.
The majority of this money to house the homeless will be going to cities like Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver. Vancouver, the third most expensive city in the world to live in. Shouldn't the government be encouraging people to stay in their own communities instead of moving into very expensive urban areas and then expect to be housed for free?
Great question. This is something I think a lot of people need to make some choices about. And you know what? Maybe there's a tiny little smidge of a silver lining to this COVID-19 disaster. Maybe now that more people are working from home, we can start spreading out to the smaller towns. We'll still need hubs. We'll still need major places of commerce like Vancouver and Calgary and Toronto with major airports and things like that. But maybe this will eventually be able to be ironed out so that people are spread out more. We're living in smaller towns and smaller cities, and we're telecommuting more often. Usually, it's human innovation and enterprise that actually fixes these problems and not government ideas. Again, we were shocked when it turns out it was just about a year ago or so that Vancouver City Hall even legalized secondary suites, like made them legal, so that if you have a basement suite, you are now able to do so. It's mind-boggling that the provincial government and city governments were planning these gigantic government solutions to things when even something so simple as allowing people to rent out their basements hadn't been legalized yet. It's a major head-scratcher. So we're really hoping that if we have lower taxes and lower regulations while keeping things safe and more permits, that we'll have more housing supply, and that will in turn enable younger people to buy their first home.
Is it true when the Harper government lowered business taxes, federal tax revenue actually increased by tens of millions?
That's what I've heard. That was before my time. I was actually still working at CTV at the time, but that's actually what I've heard. Because the thinking goes, if you lower the corporate tax rate and the federal tax rate, you encourage more industry. You encourage more business startups and entrepreneurialism and risk-taking because that person has more capital to spend and invest. And so that just seems to make perfect sense. And so that's one of the reasons why we advocate for lower taxes.
Kris, anything else you'd like to add before we wrap up?
I just want to encourage everybody that if you're concerned about these things that we're raising, do write that email, especially right now on this issue of driving taxes in Vancouver. They haven't done it yet. So what the situation is in Vancouver, Vancouver City staff, the bureaucrats, have written a big, long report. They have given it to the city councilors, the people who are elected. If you write to your city councilor, or preferably all of them, a firm but polite email saying what your concerns are about this, they will listen to you. And that makes them realize that the people that voted for them and who live in their communities care about this issue. Because these folks are snowed under by tons of information and reports all the time. And it's sometimes difficult for them to know, does my neighbor care about this? Do they really? And if you write them and say, yes, I do, that carries a lot of weight. For every one email they get, they assume another 100 people feel the same way. So pick up that keyboard and write that email.
Kris, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you for caring.
My guest has been Kris Sims, BC Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. Her website, taxpayer.com. Is there an email people can contact you with?
Yes, I would love to hear from them. My direct email is the letter K, Sims, S-I-M-S. So Ksims at taxpayer.com.
And if that doesn't work for you, you can also get a hold of Kris by contacting us at info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com are an expression of opinion only. The Goddard Report is available online and mobile at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. The Goddard Report is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated.